Welcome to Lawyerpreneur, where we discuss the alternate paths that allow lawyers to engage their entrepreneurialism and distinguish themselves from others, because being a lawyer doesn't have to mean doing business as usual. I'm your host, Jeremy Richter. Today's episode is brought to you by Alps Insurance, the nation's largest direct writer of lawyers' malpractice insurance. Founded for lawyers by lawyers over 30 years ago, Alps works directly with your firm, no broker or agent, and if you do have a claim, the Alps claims handling team is comprised of actual attorneys, all with private experience. Alps roots for the law firms they protect. They believe in your success and nurture your endeavors with industry-leading coverage, risk management resources, and accredited CLEs, offering practical advice for pioneering lawyers like you. And Alps has the slickest online application out there. Qualifying firms can apply, see rates, and bind coverage in about 20 minutes. Right now, you can get 25% off one CLE seminar from Alps. Go to alpsinsurance.com/CLE. That's ALPS insurance.com/CLE and use the promo code Lawyerpreneur upon checkout. In addition to the corporate sponsorship that helps pay for the hosting and transcription of the show, you can support Lawyerpreneur on Patreon at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. For less than the cost of a .1, you can help pay for the time it takes in creating and editing Lawyerpreneur and receive copies of my two most recent books, Stop Putting Out Fires and Level Up Your Law Practice. Now, on to the interview. Ruth Kaufman is a lawyer, an award-winning historical romance author, and an actor, and we're here today to talk about all of that. So Ruth, welcome to Lawyerpreneur.
Thank you for having me, Jeremy.
All right, I'm really excited about this. You reached out to me after my interview with Lisa Lilly, which for those of you who might not have listened to that yet, that was episode 19, and said, hey, I'm doing all these cool things. I'm paraphrasing because you were more humble about it than that, but you are. And you're exactly the kind of person that this show is about. And so I just want to get into all that.
Thank you. Yes, Lisa and I have been friends and colleagues for a couple years now.
That's really good. I first heard an interview with her a couple of years ago, and then I didn't have this podcast yet, but I had a book idea that became this podcast and will probably eventually become another book. And I wrote her name down as somebody who definitely needed to be interviewed. And so I'm glad that has led to you.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So you worked for Westlaw for 13 years and were active in the Chicago Bar Association for more than 25 years.
Yes.
And ultimately left corporate America. Did you enjoy the corporate in-house work that you did?
I was actually not an actual attorney, quote unquote. You had to have a JD to have the job I had. I was what's known as an account manager. So I worked mostly with large law firms to make sure everyone knew how to use the main product I was involved with, which was a research product known as Westlaw. So I trained everybody from the managing partner down to paralegals at the firms. And then I also negotiated their usage contracts.
Okay. Well, you'll be the perfect person to answer this question then.
Uh-oh.
When I have a new problem that I need to research, and I don't have any idea how to do that, is there any way for Westlaw just to read my brain and spit something out that's useful because I don't know how to do the query?
Well, I haven't worked there since 2005, so I'm not quite sure if they've updated their product offering to include that, but that would be great.
That may be the Skynet feature.
Yeah.
When you were doing your corporate job, were you writing and acting at that point in time? Or
Yes.
was this, okay, tell me about that.
Yes, one of the reasons I wanted to work for something like Westlaw, which was more of a 9-to-5 job, was so that I would have evenings and weekends free for booking and also vacation days, which I could use for the occasional acting job and things like that. So that's basically what I did. And having a quote unquote real job, unlike many sort of starving actors, if you will, that gave me plenty of funds to take whatever classes I wanted, to get the headshots I wanted, and have the marketing materials to get an agent. I did have an agent on the side and was able to go to some auditions. But one of the reasons I finally left Westlaw, even though it was a good job with great benefits, I had 4 weeks of paid vacation. Who wants to turn that down? Plus personal days. and holidays, so that's quite a bit of paid time off, I was getting more audition opportunities, and you can't be in two places at once. And even though some of my regular clients knew I was an actor on the side and were so kind as to say, if you don't come here next week, we won't tell anyone, I never felt comfortable even once calling in quote unquote sick just so I could go to an audition. I didn't think that was the right thing to do. I'm sure once in 13 years, it might not have mattered, but I quit because once an agent calls you and you keep turning them down, they could just move on to the next person.
Sure.
And that's what I really wanted to do. Another aspect was I was a certain age where you look around and you do the math and you think, my life is really half over. What do I want to do with the rest? And so I decided someday had to be now. And that's when I pulled the plug on real work, if you will, and decided to do the acting and writing full time because I'd been doing it on the side.
Well, it's funny you said that because I recorded a solo episode a few weeks ago that was just based on some things I'd been thinking about, where I am 38 now, and a few months ago, I just I released another book this year, and a lot of it required a lot of introspection. And one of the things I started thinking about was, okay, I'm 38. I've got another 30 years or so of work ahead of me. What do I want that to look like? And what do I want my law practice? Yeah. So sounds like the conclusion you came to was the work that you wanted to be doing was not that 9-to-5 job. You wanted to create a new career for yourself.
Right. And it was helpful, obviously, that I'd been doing all these things on the side for almost 2 decades. I think it would have been just to sort of quit abruptly a good job when you have no experience or not even much knowledge of what else you're trying to do could be even more challenging. But I did have multiple agents, I believe, at the time. In Chicago, you can have more than one if you want to. And I had also been doing voiceover, which you can do from home. And that isn't always the same schedule as an on-camera job, where before COVID anyway, you had to be somewhere in person all the time. So I needed more time to be available.
So I imagine with the voiceover work that the flexibility of being able to do that at home has been extremely beneficial in the last 6 months or so.
It has. A lot of people that I'm familiar with have sort of been scrambling to catch up with the learning curve of having recording capabilities from home. And there is a lot more technology involved than you would think. So I'm glad that I had most of that set up beforehand and already had the experience of literally hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs that I've already done from my home setup.
I saw on maybe your blog or a social media post that you're filming a commercial.
Yes.
What has filming commercials and shows, what does all that look like since everything shut down in mid-March?
Well, in my experience, I actually had a callback on March 11th for one of the Chicago Dick Wolf TV shows. So that was on March 11th. They shut down on the 12th.
Oh, wow.
So I never even heard if I got that. So all those shows have stopped. As far as I know, the only one that's just started recently and is being considered sort of a test case is Fargo. And they're doing, I believe, close to 2 weeks of filming. And I've heard that I've heard that the Dick Wolf shows will be starting up at the end of September and then in October. But commercial production did start sooner than that. I did a commercial in Milwaukee all in June, and then I did this one yesterday. So 2 commercials in person since COVID.
Well, I'm glad to hear that another iteration of Fargo is coming back, because
it is season 4. There's a lot of information in a trailer online.
I'm really excited about that because the first 3 seasons were just really solid, good stuff.
There you go.
All right. Having never done any acting outside of, like a high school play and having no real knowledge base to draw from, it has always seemed to me that voiceover acting would be really difficult because you don't have a setting or surrounding to draw any context from. Is that accurate or not at all close?
Well, I have done some film roles in voiceover, but in my experience anyway, those don't usually have the compensation that other kinds do. So for commercials, and I do a lot of narration, corporate narration, e-learning courses, you don't really need, it's not character based. You're more of a narrator. So it's more, can I deliver the message of the content that I've been given in a way that people want to listen to? Some of the e-learning courses I've done have lasted hours.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I know that, a lot of podcaster or people who write books have courses to go along with those. And sometimes those are 8 or 16 or 30 hours. So I can imagine that that's a lot of time of people listening to your voice.
And I do quite a bit of medical and technical narration because I have found that I'm able to say all those words very smoothly and in a way that apparently people are willing to listen to. For a while, I was doing medical lectures written by doctors for other doctors, and some of them went through detailed surgical processes. So I had to sound like, I couldn't be stumbling over the words. Sometimes they would have long lists of medications that people should or should not take. And so I found I do have a facility for smoothly doing that.
Well, that's actually really impressive because a lot of the work that I do is defending various bodily injury claims. And so it's involved hundreds and hundreds of, doctors' depositions over the years. And
well, you can hire me to read them for you.
But hearing lawyers, myself included, so I'm not like trying to say it's other lawyers, it's definitely me, stumble through the medical terminology that we've only ever read but never heard anybody pronounce.
Yep.
Is rough.
It is. And over the years, I've learned a lot. At first, I definitely had to look up almost every single thing, but I did work for my father, who was a doctor. So I had a little facility with some medical terminology that maybe other people might not have.
Yeah, my wife is a nurse, so she has fielded many questions about what is this and what are these medications.
That's helpful.
Yeah, it's been really nice. But sometimes she just wants me to Google it eventually.
Yeah.
Like she can only handle so much.
You may have to hire her as a consultant.
I have thought about it. All right. You've also done some improv acting. And I know that Chicago has a rich history of improv actors. Tell me about your work with that.
So true. While I had my job at Westlaw, I took classes at Improv Olympic, which unfortunately has closed since COVID, which is sad for the improv community. I was on, at the time of their closing, they had expanded to having video sketch comedy teams, and I was on one of those, and we produced a couple of sketches, and that was an interesting experience. But anyway, IO, formerly Improv Olympic, is closed, but I had completed programs there and performed on a team. I took all the classes at Comedy Sports and performed in some of their summer farm leagues, as they called it, I think. And then I also did a couple of corporate improv jobs for them, which was great. I got to go to Las Vegas. So I can say I've quote unquote done Vegas thanks to Comedy Sports. That was so much fun. And I also took all the classes at Second City that were available at the time. So I've covered all three of those, and I took 1 or 2 classes at Annoyance. So all that training has been very helpful, in particular for some of my film and commercial work. And even a feature film I was in, the director was really fond of improv, and she asked me to do it live on set, which is challenging when there's a large crew waiting for you and they don't know what you're going to say. But some of those lines did make it in the final version. So
yeah, so how does that work? I mean, you've got the camera, the shots are set up a certain way for certain things, and you are kind of winging it, I guess. Yep. How does that work at a practical level?
Well, to me, it's a little more stressful because in improv, live in a theater, people expect that some things will be funny and some won't because they know you're making it up in the moment. But when people are watching a film, they don't know whether a line that comes out of your mouth is improvised or scripted. Plus, if it's funny, you can't get reaction because that would ruin the take. So everything feels like a bomb. Like you're just failing right and left. And the only way I knew I succeeded was when a couple of the crew members came up to me at lunch and they were, I was biting my cheek. You were so funny. So And then they always did do at least one take with the exact words, so they had that option. But they wanted people to be able to develop characters, and improv can help with that if you have had enough training or have just a natural facility somehow.
Yeah, doing jury trials is
Yeah.
similar, except you never get to have any feedback until the case is over, if the jurors choose to talk to you afterwards.
True.
And so,
well, and even back in law school, I was on my national appellate team. So that was, I didn't know it at the time, but that was really great improv training, because at least with a jury trial, theoretically, you have written most of what you're going to prepared in advance. But in appellate team training, the panel of judges, which could range from anywhere from 3 to 5 to 9 at one point, I actually got to argue in front of Justice Sandra Day O'Connor.
oh wow,
in the final rounds. That was pretty neat. But they could ask you anything, and it can be on topic or off topic. My topic was RICO, the racketeer influenced, I can't even remember, and corruptions,
right.
something. And one of the judges at one round, there were 5 judges, and they started asking me about ice cream, which had, I still remember this to this day. And of course, you can't make a face like, what is this, dude? You just have to say ice cream. Let me, quickly drum up information about that. So that was really an unsolicited, amazing exercise in high level improv, because at least when you're in a film, you just sort of have to stay in the bounds of the character. But with quote unquote legal improv, you've got to stick with what's real. You can't you can maybe make up a theory or two, but you need to support that with cases. And so that was definitely a challenge. And we did come in second in the country.
Oh, well, that's really cool.
Thank you.
All right. So you just mentioned that one particular aspect of law school that kind of aided you as you went along in your acting. Were there other parts of law school or your career as a lawyer that helped with acting or writing or the producing work you've done?
I'd have to say that I also had a real job before Westlaw. I worked for what was then Arbitron Radio Ratings in a somewhat similar position, which was sort of sales and marketing oriented, and also contracts as well. So having a business background and being able to negotiate or understand contracts somewhat, whereas some actors I've come across have never really read many contracts, and I've literally been on set where people sign things without even reading them. So that experience and knowing how to sort of organize a territory of clients has proven very helpful for organizing the business side of acting.
Take a
and
lot
also
to not just jump in and say, hey, you might not want to give away the farm here like this.
Yes. Well, or just, I mean, we could have a whole podcast just on acting contracts, and I'm happy to come back and do that. But sometimes they're egregious, or they don't say what you had agreed to from your agent. The actual terms you're presented are different than what your agent agreed to. It's happened more than once, because the legal department and the production department don't always, in my experience anyway, don't always share. They just send the contract. So it's definitely something you want to keep an eye out for.
Well, yeah, and I'm not familiar with the acting side, but that sounds, familiar to me from the publishing side, because my first book was published through a traditional publisher. And then I knew that I wanted that experience. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do it was to have a publisher's name by my first book, because I thought that mattered to me more than ultimately it did.
Understood.
So the last few I have published through my own publishing imprint because of two things, primarily of wanting to retain the control and to retain my own intellectual property rights. So I can identify with those things.
Sure. Yes, understood.
Oh, back to the improv for a second.
Sure.
A lot of us are familiar with The Office, and Michael Scott does some improv classes, and he's awful and makes everyone else's experience miserable. Have you been in any situations with anybody like that?
Well, I did have the late Del Close as one of my teachers, and he was very, in my recollection, blunt and maybe some actors maybe have more fragile egos maybe than they should. And instead of having a supportive and encouraging approach, he was more blunt and direct. And he definitely made one woman cry in our class, which I still remember the look on her face, and everyone else sort of sat there in silence. But he was very respected as one of the best teachers in town, and that was his method. So
one of the things that I've written a fair bit about is for lawyers, particularly older lawyers that are teaching younger lawyers and associates, to provide constructive criticism and feedback in a timely manner and in a way that is really specific and helps. I'm sure you've had a lot of experience, whether it's directors or in classes, coaching, of seeing different methods of that. What have you seen that's helpful in providing feedback that gets results versus not helpful?
that's an interesting question, and hard to sum up because everyone has such a different style. But I suppose, and each person is going to accept criticism and direction different ways, but straightforward and clear is the best. I still remember there was a time where I did a voiceover commercial for a food product, and they asked me if I could be more lyrical. I know what lyrical means in my mind. Obviously, I didn't really have a dictionary to double check the specific verbiage of the definition, but all they could say was every time, be more lyrical, be more lyrical. They didn't really define what that meant to them or add other terms. And so I wasn't sure if I was delivering what they wanted.
Yeah, I think I would have interpreted that to be like sing-songy almost.
I see. Well, there you go. That's what I just said, that everyone takes verbiage. And I try, as a writer as well, I try to be very specific with a word that I think fits best. But I thought they meant at the time sort of smoother and more flowy. So I obviously tried many times.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so much of what we do in writing, whether it's for products, for you writing books, word choices make such a difference in the outcome and the connotations that readers have or listeners. So that's really interesting.
Sure. Well, and a lot too depends on the decision maker. I've had a lot of voiceover jobs that have gone very smoothly, don't get me wrong, but sometimes the ones that didn't go as well stand out. I had done something, if people don't know, when you used to go into a voiceover studio, you're in a glass booth and you can only hear the engineer and any client people who are there if they press like an intercom button to talk to you. So they can be talking and you see their mouths moving and you have no idea. They could be talking about sandwiches or they could be criticizing you or praising you. You have no idea. So I had gone through this whole voiceover thing and the client was happy that was there. The engineers were happy. We were getting ready to wrap. And then somebody else walked in who hadn't been there before, who was in charge, and he didn't like it. And we had to start all over. So sound and acting and everything is in the eye and ear of the beholder, especially the beholder who's in charge.
Wow. That sounds terribly frustrating.
Well, that's show, in my job, which is a bit unfortunate, or also even being an author, if you want to make money, your goal is to please other people.
Sure, absolutely.
It's not, I've seen a lot of actors who think it's about them, but it's really about, just like you as an attorney, it's about the client.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going next is it's not, there's a lot of lawyers who lose sight of that we are a service industry. And there's a lot of self-importance in our profession.
Sure. Actors too, yeah.
And it all comes back to, have you set the client's expectations? And are you meeting them? And are you doing the things that they need you to accomplish?
In this time frame that it needs to be done.
Yeah. So it sounds like there are a lot of crossover lessons there.
Yes. Well, that was helpful as well, because I definitely, some of my clients were more or less difficult than others, for sure. So.
Yeah. So I guess whether you were working at Westlaw or whether you're acting or writing, in all of those situations, you have clients and you need to meet their expectations and produce results.
Solve their problems.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to go back to that you talked about early on here was having a runway before you,
Yes.
burned
I
your
like
career
that.
bridge
Having a
behind you.
runway. I like it.
Oh, good, good. And so you didn't just make a clean break and decide, well, I haven't done any of this before, but I'm gonna give it a go. And I have seen where people have done that to varying degrees of success, and I think a lot of people have the idea that I can't have this side hustle or this alternate career that I'm working on alongside my day job. I just have to do one or the other. And it seems like that would have put a great deal more pressure on your ability or your need to be financially successful immediately, that could have hindered your productivity.
Sure. And if I had just wanted to do voiceover, I might have been able to continue having two jobs, if you will, because mostly voiceover, you could do it even at 2 a.m. Very rarely is there literally such a rush job. Sometimes auditions are rush and they only give you a few hours, but you would just miss out on that opportunity. That's not the end of the world. And obviously, if a client needed a rush job and you were lawyering or whatever, you would just say, this is when I can deliver this. Is this acceptable? And they would either say yes or no. So I probably could have done that, but I really also enjoy on camera, and I've done quite a few films and quite web series, commercials, and I did not want to make that part of my career. So that's when the availability really became an issue.
And was that the catalyst? Was it, I want to go into these other things and have these new experiences? And that's when you said, okay, this is.
Well, I wanted to be an actor my whole life, really. Basically, since kindergarten is the first time I remember wanting to be an actor, because I had lines in our little holiday pageant and people laughed, and I'm like, this is great. And I continued in grade school theater, all that kind of stuff. But my father, as many fathers, were sort of against that. My father was sort of against that, is that, you can't make a career as a creative person. You're a smart person, go to law school, be a doctor, or own your own business. That's basically it from his point of view. So even though I continued to do acting on the side, he wasn't very supportive. He didn't, as far as I recall, come to any of my college performances, things like that. So, but it's something I always wanted to do. But as well as probably almost everyone in America, that not that many actors are successful in putting roofs over their heads with that. So that was sort of the risk.
And now you're a showrunner for a comedic web series. Tell me about that.
Yes. Some friends and I, especially during the pandemic, wait, I have to back up. I'm starting over.
Okay.
The web series. We keep hearing actors from casting directors and agents that it's important to create your own content, but sometimes coming up with good content is an issue. I've seen a lot, in my opinion, of not so good self-created content that I'm not sure really helps the people who created it. But especially during this COVID time, casting directors and actors in various seminars and things were saying, create your own content, So some friends and I decided we would do this comedic web series, and they sort of voted me as the showrunner, which means I'm in charge of all our departments, and I'm also the head writer. We have completed we're still tweaking the 6th episode, but we've written the first season, which is going to be 6 episodes. We have a director. We're supposed to be recording the first episode on the 5th of September, and we're just waiting on some paperwork issues before we can launch our website and the teaser that I put together. So we're getting closer, but as you must know, with projects you do, it's very similar to legal things. You might be writing a contract, but there's a few snags and you're waiting for clarification for whatever purpose. So once a few snags are worked out, we have stuff ready to release.
Well, that's really cool. Is that a role you've had before, or is this new territory?
Nope. It's all new. And while I'm grateful for the experience, as you know too, lawyers are often encouraged to do pro bono work, which can be very rewarding, and you can learn a lot, but you're spending a lot of time for no money.
Sure.
And that's what this
can be the same thing, right?
Yes, and that's what this is so far. So I'm glad I'm doing it. I'll be happy when when it's quote unquote in the can. But because there is a large cast, it's not like I could make myself, even if I wanted to, quote unquote, the star. So, but I am doing a lot of things, and the writing was fun, and we'll hope that it turns out good.
Have you done screenwriting before this?
I have not. I have been encouraged to several times, and of course I've read many screenplays. Obviously, I've been in many things with screenplays, and I've even edited some screenplays for other people and critiqued them. But the way I think, I couldn't come up with an idea to come up with a screenplay, and I was getting ready to take a screenwriting class to turn one of my novels into a possible screenplay, and that novel had just won a national contest, a manuscript to screen contest, so you could submit the book instead of a screenplay, and it won top comedy. So I thought maybe at this point I'll give a shot at turning that into a screenplay. And then this web series came up, so I've sort of set that to the side because I also need to focus on finding ways to make money during this time as well. So,
all right, so I definitely wanted to talk about your book, so this is a good segue into that. You've written two very different styles of fiction books. You've got historical romance.
Yes.
And then tell me about the other two books that you've written.
Those are slightly different as well. The first one is, I would call it humorous women's fiction, because you're really not supposed to call it a romance unless that's a journey throughout the whole book.
Okay.
And I knew when I wrote the first one, I didn't want her to end up with anybody. So the second one is more of a romantic comedy. Okay. And it may or may not be based on true events. They're called My Life as an Extra. I have worked as an extra more than 80 times, so that's why I wrote that book. And then the sequel is My Life as a Star, which I don't really know that much about yet.
I totally understand that. This may not sound peculiar, or it might. I have fairly vivid dreams, and about 6 months ago, I had a couple of different dreams and wrote them down, and they kind of went together in this really bizarre fantasy type scene. And then a couple of weeks ago, I thought, okay, I know how to string these things together, and wrote another 5,000 or 6,000 words, and thought,
wow,
okay, this may be a thing. But I don't know where it's going, which is different from anything else that I've ever written. And I don't know how we're going to get there entirely. And I'm totally uncomfortable with that. And so where you said, what you just said about My Life as a Star, and you weren't sure where it's going, that struck a chord with me, I guess.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll see. Honestly, though, it's hard, as I'm sure you know, to get the book sales up. So I have not been devoting time or resources to the constant marketing and ad spends that are required. So I'm not honestly sure if I'm going to write more books. We'll see.
Okay.
I have 6 novels now and 3 novellas with a small press. And those, of course, the small press gets half the profits. I mean, that makes sense. But for me to spend a lot of time and money to promote a novella, which isn't the same price as a book, is hard to sort of justify financially as well. So I really haven't done as much as many authors do with that.
Well, that makes sense. You've got to make a financial decision between your creative pursuits of, I may enjoy this thing, but if it's not bringing in income and these other things are that I also enjoy, then that's maybe where I need to spend my time.
Yeah. So, and especially now the world is so different, I'm not really sure. Yeah, no one is probably really sure. Very few people, unless you maybe work for Clorox or Lysol.
Yeah, they seem to be doing.
Or Zoom.
Yeah. Or maybe if you have a paper towel or toilet paper industry.
Exactly. Yes, there's definitely a few industries that are probably doing very well. But
well, I can tell you on my own book sales that I have seen a marked decrease this year as compared to last year. And had the distinct misfortune of launching a book at the end of March, at the early onset of the pandemic. And so it was not a hugely successful launch.
I'm sorry.
People were not interested in reading nonfiction and self-improvement when we were just trying to figure out, are we about to survive this or not? So
sure, how do we get through the day? Yeah.
And, I haven't wanted to read nonfiction either. Most of my reading this year has been science fiction and fantasy, and
Sure.
let me escape everything and not self-improvement.
Exactly. Understood. I'm sure most people feel the same way. I know I do.
Have you read any books lately that you would recommend?
I have not been doing a lot of reading. I find that having an attention span to focus on books, I've read a couple novels that I'm enjoying, but I find for some reason that television and video is easier to just process right now. It takes, I guess, less brain energy, if you will. And I am still trying to work a full day in terms of marketing for new work and doing work that's coming in. So more reading or more screens is just not right now something I'm doing a lot.
Yeah, I totally get that.
I have been watching quite a bit of Netflix and chill, as they say, or other things like that. I did just see a very good movie on Hulu that I did enjoy called Please Stand By with Dakota Fanning that I thought was very good.
So I've seen that on there, but we haven't watched it yet.
Really good.
The last Hulu movie that we watched was Palm Springs.
Yes, I saw that.
I really thought that was super interesting. I appreciated that it was an iteration of Groundhog Day, but they definitely nodded their heads to it and said, we know where we're at.
Sure.
But I liked that movie.
And something else I really enjoyed was Upload on Amazon Prime Video.
Oh, what's that about? I'm not familiar with it.
I believe it's been renewed for season 2 already, but I'm not sure how they'll progress. As you know, we just covered many shows are still in flux about that. It has to do with uploading your conscience when you die to different environments, whether you can afford them or not.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And I really enjoyed that. I thought it was introspective yet funny.
I like that. Are we about to hit a period of television like we did with the writer's strike? When was that? A decade or so ago? Of where we have an influx of reality television and a lag of new stuff?
For the short term, I believe, for example, what network was it? One of the main, ABC or CBS, I think it might have been ABC. I remember reading the exact comment in an article, we're so glad we had a slate of reality programs.
Oh.
So, because that's what can be shot or has been shot. But I do know that scripted shows are starting up. However, I also have read that some of them are incorporating COVID and some are not. So I believe Grey's Anatomy is, and I think The Doctor is. I believe I read those things. So that's going to be interesting, because while I know it is, of course, a part of our daily conscience, I'm not sure that every time I turn on the TV, I want to relive people handling that. Like you said, it's nice to get away from it, even just a couple hours, since it is our reality. Does that make sense? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I listen to a lot of writing podcasts, and I've heard authors talk about whether they're incorporating it or not. And most of the ones I've listened to have said, I'm not ready to do that because I'm not sure how to write it in yet, but also I don't think a reader wants that.
That too. I recently attended a virtual conference where that was basically the outcome of what I heard people say. And I spoke to an editor briefly, and she said that as well. Also in part because we could only write about where we are now. And that could last, we're hoping, we all will hope, maybe only a few more months. So in my opinion, your book could instantly be dated.
Yeah.
It's hard enough with pop culture references, which I have, especially in my romantic comedy. It's hard enough to stay on top of that. Restaurants change, or even the Tribune Tower was going to maybe change its name. And things like that, like stable things like buildings. So with the pandemic sort of shifting, if a vaccine, let's say, comes out in 6 months and your book won't have that.
Right. Your book won't have it. And then everything that you've written into it was going to be
right. So
yeah.
I'm not sure what's the best approach. And I don't know what I would do if I wrote another book. Well, if it's in medieval England, I don't have to worry.
You may have plagues and whatnot,
yes.
but but not.
I do have plague in one of my books.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is on your website, it says that your personal motto is someday is now.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of talked about your approach to life and your career, but tell me how that motto of someday is now affects your approach to your work, and how do you incorporate that kind of practically?
Well, it's been a little bit harder lately, I have to admit, because there are so many fewer things one can do right now with their time. You know, we can't go to plays anymore, which is something I really used to enjoy, things like that. So I've just been sort of taking one day at a time, really, which I think more people are, because as we also said, sometimes just getting through the day can be a challenge, especially if you're out of work right now or struggling in whatever way. So I'm really just trying to take the issues that are in front of me one day at a time, and then leave some time in the evening. I'm a morning person, so I'm usually at my computer before 7. So, you know, by 5 or 6, it's time to move on and try to find some lighter, more enjoyable, not serious things to immerse myself in.
And, you know, I was in a very fortunate position throughout all this of having a job to go to every
That's
day.
great.
Or not to go to, I guess. For most of it, I was not going to it, but it
Right,
was meeting me
right.
where I was at. But you know, I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And we were home every day. And certainly that had its challenges. It's can be difficult to write a, you know, heavy motion with with the 5-year-old asking me if I can play Legos every 10 minutes. But also it was amazing to be able to have that time together that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Right.
And so there were some, obviously it's been devastating to so many people. But there were also some light points to it as well that gave us experiences of just time spent together that wouldn't have otherwise been the case.
Sure.
And now as we've been back in our office for a couple of months now, but I've still been working from home more regularly, or, you know, leaving after lunch to go work from home while the little one naps. And, you know, to still be able to, because I like it better for one thing, I just like being able to spend that time with them.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely grateful for all the Zoom auditions I've been getting, and even the self-tape auditions, which you record yourself. But I do miss the in-person interaction when you used to go to the casting director's offices and see them in person and connect with friends and colleagues. You know, all that is done for now, at least. So there's definitely some losses. I've definitely had more time. I said I wasn't going to maybe write anything, but I did have an editor at a publisher express interest in a high concept novel that I had started, and I sent her the first 3 chapters. So I've sort of been plugging along with that just on the off chance she asks for more. And that, of course, I've had more time to do things like that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we are about out of time, but I want to make sure people know where they can find you online and work and follow you.
That would be my website. My acting website is ruthtalks.com. That's ruthtalks.com. And my writing website is ruthkaufman.com.
All right. Thanks so much. I really enjoyed our talk.
Thank you so much for having me, and let's hope for good things going forward.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Please take time to rate and subscribe at whatever podcatcher you're listening on. And if you want more from me, you can find me at jeremywrichter.com. You can also find me on Twitter at RichterJW. And if you want the extra audio and benefits available at Patreon, you can become a patron at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. Thanks for listening.